Hey there, it's Shauna, and today I'm going to show you how I make authentic Spanish paella. If you didn't already know this about me, I was born in Palma de Mallorca, Spain. My parents and I became U.S. citizens in 1995. We moved to Florida in 1989, and I was born in Spain in 1984. Prior to that, my parents lived in Spain for 5 years. So after I was born, we lived in Spain for 4 or 5 years, and so my parents were actually in Spain for right around 10 years. So what I'm doing now is just simply rinsing and dicing my peppers and onions, getting them ready for the pan. And now in a cast iron pan, I've heated up about 4 tablespoons of avocado oil, but you can use any cooking oil that you have on hand, just not coconut oil, peanut oil, or ghee, as that won't give the right flavor for the paella. Add in your peppers and onions once the oil gets nice and hot and the garlic gets fragrant. I'm kind of a messy cook, so things are always flying everywhere and pieces of onion are getting into the gas stove grates. But I promise I do try my best to deep clean my oven and my gas stove once a week, and I've gotten pretty good about that. I didn't used to be. But in between cleanings, it doesn't look so hot. But you know what? Life is messy. So I'm just moving things around in the pan to make sure that it doesn't stick to the cast iron skillet too much, because there's going to be plenty of browning in the oven later. So I'm adding in some cherry tomatoes. You can add in diced tomatoes or whatever tomatoes you have on hand. And next I'm going to be adding in some organic tomato paste, just about a tablespoon. Now I don't know if this is worth mentioning, but I'll go ahead and say it. Ideally you want to use a 14 to 18 inch paella pan that's specially made for this, but since I don't have one on hand, I am using the cast iron skillet, which works just as well. The only difference is you don't get as much of a nice spread of the rice, so you have less of that nice brown crust on the bottom. Now you see here I'm adding in some frozen squid. I have to admit I'm a little disappointed in the seafood selection here in Colorado. So much different from Florida, just the freshness of it. I'm a little bit nervous on how this seafood is going to actually taste in the paella, but gotta work with what you got. When you start adding in the seafood into the pan, there's naturally going to be some moisture that seeps out of the squid and such. This is not a problem. It's totally normal. And it actually helps with cooking the rice evenly that I just added into the pan. I've added about a cup of rice, and I poured the rice into the pan in a cross shape, just because that's the way I've always been taught. I don't know why, but that's how I've always made it. This is my dad's recipe, and he learned it from a local in Spain. And actually, the funny thing about my dad is everywhere that they traveled in Europe, Italy, France, Spain, my dad always made friends with the local chefs, and he learned all sorts of techniques and recipes from them over the years, and that's been sort of passed down to me. But as tasty as the things that I cook turn out, I can't ever get things to be quite as delicious as my dad makes it. He just has this way of bringing out flavors that once you take a bite of something, you actually taste the culture of that country. Now I'm going to add in the equivalent of a stick of butter, and the way this is packaged, it's about 8 tablespoons. Now I'm just going to work the butter around the pan, making sure that the bottom of the pan is well coated with all of that yummy butter. That's really going to help create our brown crust once it comes out of the oven. Now I'm going to just make sure that the butter is coating very nicely all the ingredients in the pan. Oh, this smells incredible already. I really wish that you could smell this. When is smell-o-vision going to finally come out? Now that everything's gotten a nice little stir, I'm going to grab some black pepper and freshly ground a generous amount over top of everything. And you can just do this to taste. I happen to like a lot of black pepper, so I'm adding in quite a bit. And now I'm going to grab some ground turmeric and sprinkle about a teaspoon of that over top, just to give the rice that classic paella color. Stir, stir, stir. You can see that with the butter and the seafood juice, the rice is already starting to form that beautiful brown crust. But we don't want the rice to brown too much before it goes into the oven, so I'm going to pour a liquid into here along with some shrimp that I have been boiling beforehand for about 15 to 20 minutes. And all that's in this liquid is some chicken broth, some shrimp, some sprigs of saffron, little sprinkle of turmeric, and look at that beautiful color. I'll put the actual measurements of everything in the description box and the pinned comments down below. It'll be a link that goes to my website. If you didn't know already, my website, solagratialife.com, is filled with blog posts that mainly talk about growing in the Lord, everything homemaking, marriage, and motherhood, and all kinds of other fun stuff like recipes, DIY instructions, and things like that. We're approaching the end of our cooking journey here with this recipe, and now I'm going to add in some shellfish, starting with clams. Now I'm doing seafood here, but really you can add just about any protein you want. You can add chicken, you could add chorizo, sausage, you can add pork. The limits are actually none. It's so unnecessary, but I'm taking my sweet time arranging the clams into the pan just because I felt like taking my time and sort of pretend like I'm painting a picture. I think it's important to find little moments where you could savor things and be as creative as you want to be. So now I'm adding in some mussels. Now I'm adding in frozen mussels, but I highly suggest that if you do this, you use fresh mussels, especially if you have access to good quality seafood that you can get fresh for a decent price, because I have found that when you use frozen mussels, or any shellfish for that matter, but especially mussels because they have sort of a thinner shell, the frozen kind actually makes the shells very brittle from the freezing process, and you could quite possibly get broken pieces of shell in your food, which I really don't mind picking things out of my rice, but you might, and so there's my tip for you. Now in goes some frozen peas. At this point, the oven has already been preheating to 425 degrees, so I am now going to put the cast iron pan into the oven and let it bake for 45 minutes. This will allow the rest of that liquid to cook down and really soak into the rice, as well as giving the bottom of the rice, at the bottom of the pan I should say, a nice brown crust. And here is the finished product. Carefully pull it out of the oven and voila! Now I'm going to cue up some music while I go ahead and serve a helping and do a taste test.